Negroes want the same things that white citizens possess. All of their rights. They want no reservations. They want complete equality, social, economic, and political. And no force under the sun can stem and block and stop this civil rights revolution which is now underway.
The people who started the movement and propelled the movement had by and large come out of such trauma from violence and discrimination and poverty, and yet they created a movement that was built on idealism and nonviolence and in many ways generosity of spirit.
It has been moved and seconded that the resolution as read will be received and adopted. Are you ready for the question? That was the day that we started a bus protest which literally electrified the nation.
One woman, a seamstress, tired after a hard day's work, got fed up with her 40 years of living under Jim Crow because one woman said, "I have had enough." And suddenly, just like that, 50,000 voices answered, "Amen, sister, enough for us too." For refusing to give up her seat to a white man, she was arrested and fined, and the Negro people of Montgomery have refused to ride the buses ever since.
Claudette Colvin.
And I have been teaching about Claudette Colvin for 20 years. And the thing is, I've loved teaching about Claudette Colvin because nobody knows who she is.
Claudette Colvin is an activist who was a pioneer in the civil rights movement in Alabama during the 1950s. On March 2nd, 1955, she was arrested at the age of 15 in Montgomery, Alabama, for refusing to give up her seat to a white woman on a crowded, segregated bus.
During this time in the South, buses were segregated and the seats in the front were for the white people and the seats in the back were for the black people. Bus drivers enforced the segregation. However, there was a local law stating that black people could not be asked to give up their seat for a white person when it was crowded. Unfortunately, this provision of the law was usually ignored. Claudette, who was well aware of her rights, refused and told the bus driver, "It is my constitutional right to sit here as much as that lady's. I paid my fare. It is my constitutional right."
I said I could not move because history had me glued to the seat. And they said, "How is that?" I said, "Well, it felt as though Harriet Tubman hands were pushing me down on one shoulder and Sojourner Truth's hand was pushing me down on the other."
She ended up being arrested and became the first woman to be arrested for violating segregation laws. She was charged with disturbing the peace, breaking the city's segregation ordinance, and assaulting a policeman.
We all think that Rosa Parks started something, that it all started with Rosa Parks, and oh my gosh, she was this like really, self-effacing, shy, domestic woman who just was tired on the bus one day. I don't know why Americans love that story. They love to think that she was the first and that, it was kind of an accident. She was just tired. In fact, this story, even of Rosa Parks, is so much more complicated than that. She was a real activist in her own right for decades before she refused to give up her seat on the bus. But one reason I like to talk about Claudette Colvin is that it shows that movements make strategic decisions about what individuals they throw their weight behind. And Claudette Colvin wasn't the one that civil rights activists wanted to support in the 50s. They thought Claudette Colvin did not represent the face that they wanted to put on their movement. One, she was young. Two, she didn't have the moral impeccability that Rosa Parks later would bring to the table. 3, I believe she was not married and pregnant. I heard a story with her where she claimed that another thing that she thought worked against her came to getting NAACP support for her effort to challenge racial segregation on the buses is she thought her hair texture was a problem. She thought her appearance, that it wasn't just her behavior, wasn't just her age, her marital status, whatever, but it was also her appearance. And she thought that Rosa Parks had a middle-class, respectable appearance for a Black woman in the 50s that the men in the movement thought was going to be more effective. And you know what? They were probably right. The people who become historical heroes are not necessarily the people who were the most heroic or even the only ones who were heroic, but were often the ones who were chosen because they fit a particular mold that, movement leaders thought was going to get attention and achieve success.
Claudette and 3 other brave Montgomeryans filed a successful lawsuit against the state of Alabama. Judges ruled that the city's segregated bus system was unconstitutional. It was a major breakthrough in the fight for civil rights.
In 1969, she began work as a nurse's aide in Manhattan for 35 years, retiring in 2004. Ever since Colvin moved to New York, she was largely forgotten about.
As far as Claudette Colvin's role, what's her significance, what historical significance she will take on, it's an interesting question. I think in some ways, because her life at the time that she resisted bus segregation was in many ways much more difficult than Rosa Parks' life, I think in a way that almost makes her seem more heroic in a lot of ways.
Achieve equal rights as any human being deserves. That's what we're working for.
What do you think the prospects are for achieving that goal?
I think we'll be successful if we continue.
How long do you think it would take?
I have no idea.
So I think the civil rights movement was a moment of incredible idealism that's inspiring. Couldn't accomplish what it needed to, still hasn't, and I don't know what today's moment calls for, but it calls for something. It's an unfinished movement. I don't want your generation to look at the civil rights movement and see it as a failure. But I also don't want your generation to look at the civil rights movement and see it as a success.
The civil rights movement builds the framework of American history, and it allows students to make connections to modern day racism and struggles of Black people today.
Back to a time in the 21st century when people are coming up with new strategies for disfranchising folks. That's where today, in any case, we're seeing violations of people's civil rights based on race most clearly. And those fall most heavily probably on the shoulders of Black men, but Black women are not immune to them. I want your generation to have a very complicated perspective on the civil rights movement, to see it as a moment, an inspiring moment, when some real progress was possible, and when we could see that individuals who were propelling the movement forward and leading the movement.
To see the challenges that African Americans face on a daily basis is enough to see that there needs to be change. But as of right now, it's more of getting involved with these organizations, exercising the rights that you do have, because as I said before, the people who are in charge now won't be forever, and I feel as though it's our responsibility to make that change because no one else is going to do it for us.
When I say your generation, I don't mean your white generation. I mean your generation of people of all races need to do a much better job of working together to figure these things out. Not pointing fingers, not pulling back into our own racially exclusive enclaves, but working together. And I think there's something really inspiring about that. And I think it says something really hopeful about possibilities for racial reckoning in the 21st century.
You've got to learn to get along with everybody. You can't just... You've got to work with all kinds of people. You might as well start right now going to school with all kinds of people.
There must be lights burning brighter somewhere. Got to be birds flying higher in a sky more blue. If I can dream of a better land where all my brothers walk hand